Story.
Well, after that, how can one refuse? It would be wrong. It would be wrong. All right. So this story comes from long ago. So far ago, in the midst of time, the mists of time, does this story come, that some of it hasn't even happened yet. This story comes from a place. In this place, the snows on the mountains would melt in the spring, and they would run down to the great mother rivers, and the rivers would run down to the salty sea. That's the kind of place it was. It was a place of fields and forests and hills. And in that place, once in that time, once behind that time, once under a time, once upon a time, there was a little family. There was a husband and a wife, and they had a little son they named John. Now this family lived on a little farm. They were what you might call smallholders. And they tried to make a go of this little plot of land. They worked hard. They weren't bad farmers, but they didn't always have good luck. It seemed that every year in the spring, they had a little less than they'd had the year before at the same time. This went on for some years, and eventually they had to make a hard decision. They decided that to make a living, they would have to sell their labor, to stop farming for themselves and go work for others. Now the father, he took a job as a farmhand at a local farm. And the mother, she went out and she did some farm work and worked in the village and took in mending and did the things she could do. And that's how they made their living, poor as it was. This went on for some years. But one day, the father sustained some injury. I don't remember what it was. Maybe you do. For now the web of his life has crossed with the web of yours. Maybe you remember where he was injured. It could have been he was kicked by a horse. It could have been he cut himself on some tool. But whatever it was, that wound festered, and he grew sicker. And eventually, one day, he turned his face to the wall, and he breathed his last breath in this world. And not long after that, still in her grief, John's mother came down sick. And eventually, she took to her bed. And not long after that, she too breathed her last breath in this world and left John entirely orphaned. Well, by now, John was just on the cusp of manhood. And he decided he would work that little farm. He would make his living there. And so, he plowed his fields and broke up the clods and prepared that soil. And he sowed wheat. And he tended that wheat field carefully. And he had some luck. The wheat came up. He had a nice crop of wheat going. And in due time, that wheat ripened and was ready for harvest. And it was then that John realized that he didn't have a sickle or a scythe to cut it. And so he gathered a few things that he could take to town and trade or pawn or sell. And he went to the little village And he made some swaps and he made some deals and he got a little money together and he went to a smith and he purchased a sickle. And the smith put a nice edge on it for him. But when he got home to harvest his wheat, it fell out that a flock of sparrows had descended on that field and they picked it virtually clean and even broken over all the stalks. And so he was left with nothing but the gleanings. And so after processing that disaster, John thought about his situation and he decided there's not enough time this year to put in another crop of wheat, but I can plant a crop of buckwheat. And so once again, he worked hard and he plowed under that wheat and he prepared the field for seeding again and he planted buckwheat. And that buckwheat came in beautiful, nice and thick. And one morning he woke up and he saw that the buckwheat had flowered. It was like a beautiful white lake, his field. White flowers with a few pink ones thrown in. It was a sight to gladden the heart of any farmer. But a night or two later, there was an unseasonable cold snap, and a frost descended on that field, and it killed all the buckwheat in flower. And so again, he was left with nothing. And now it was too late to plant any other crop. And so, like his parents before him, John was forced to sell his labor. He went out and he found a farmer who was looking for a farmhand. And he made an agreement to work for a period of 1 year in service to that farmer. For 1 year, every morning as the sun just brightened the eastern sky, John was up working, and he worked all day, every day of that year until the sun set. The farmer was a hard man, but fair. And when his year of service was up, the farmer gave him his agreed upon wage, and it was this. The farmer gave him a fine colt. John planned to take that colt back, raise it up, train it, and sell it. He was so happy to be going home. He was bringing his little colt back. And he stopped in a woods and he tied up the colt and he sat under a tree in the shade to take his lunch. But while he was having his lunch, a pack of wolves descended on that colt, and they killed it before John could drive them off. So again, he was left with nothing. He had no choice. He went back to his master, the farmer, and he signed on for a period of 1 more year of service. The farmer said, "Well, John, what will you have for your wage this time?" John said, "Well, I don't want cattle. They're too easily taken away. You know what I'll have? There's an old millstone sitting in the back farmyard there. I'll take that." The farmer said, "What are you going to do with a millstone? You don't have a mill." "That millstone's been there my whole life. I don't even know how it got there. Why don't you pick something else?" "No," said John. "At least I'll have something. What can happen to a millstone?" So the farmer shook his head and said, "Suit yourself." They made the bargain, and John worked again every day, sun up till sundown, for that farmer for a period of 1 year. And when that year was up, he pried that millstone up on its edge, and he rolled it back to his little place. Now, as the farmer said, he had no real use for it. So he just laid it on its side near his front door. And he used it as a kind of a table, or maybe a kind of altar. When he hauled water from the spring, he would put the buckets there as an offering, just to set them there. He loved that millstone. At least he'd gotten something. One afternoon, clouds darkened in the west, and thunders rolled. And a thunderstorm broke over his little place, and it happened that a bolt of lightning struck right on that millstone, and it shattered into 1,000 pieces. And so John, considering his situation once again, decided, as many young men do, that he would leave the farm. He would go to the big city and make his fortune there. And he packed up a few things, and he headed out on the road, heading for the capital city. He walked, as they say, for a long time or a short time on the way. But one day in his travels, he passed by a field, and there was a farmer out in that field working alone, cutting hay. And as he passed by, the farmer saw him, and he called out and he said, "Hey, young fellow, I'm trying to get this hay in before the weather changes. I could sure use a hand. I'll make it worth your while." John said, "Well, why not? I'm looking for work. Sure, I can cut hay." And he jumped over the fence and he joined the farmer in that field. And they cut hay all that day, and they raked it up and they piled it into haycocks in the way they did in those days. And for his reward, the farmer gave him a rooster. John tucked that rooster under his arm and packed up his things, and he headed out on the road again. And on the way to that capital city, he made a decision. He decided he would find someone who could judge him fairly and tell him why it was that his parents had worked their whole lives hard and they had nothing to show for it, and why he was on the same road now. For years he'd worked hard and had nothing. He decided he would go to the emperor himself, and he would tell him his story, and maybe the emperor would pity him. Maybe he would offer him a job. And so he went right to the capital city and went right up to the gate of the palace. And of course, the gates of the palace are guarded. And the guard saw this yokel with a chicken under his arm and stopped him right there. And he said, "Where do you think you're going?" And John said, "I want to see the emperor. I want him to judge me fairly and tell me why it is. My parents worked their whole lives. They worked hard and they never got anything for it. And I'm on the same road as they are. Why that is. I want the emperor to tell me that." And the guard said, "Listen, young man, if I let you into that courtyard, they're going to turn the dogs loose on you. And then it's going to get ugly after that. Just go home. Get out of here." But John wouldn't be dissuaded. He sat down right there and he decided he would sit there and he would not eat nor drink. He would sit there in the dust by the side of the road with that chicken under his arm until the emperor saw him. For 3 days and nights he sat there. And on the third day, it so happened that the emperor looked out a window that overlooked that front gate, and he heard someone moaning down there. And he saw John sitting there with a chicken under his arm, and he said to one of his people, "Who's that?" And so inquiries were made, and the guard at the gate was consulted, and he said, "Oh, he wants to see the emperor. He wants him to judge him." This message was brought back to the emperor, and the emperor said, kind of on a lark, "Well, why not? Bring him in." And so John was brought before the emperor in the great throne room. And the emperor said, "Well, what is it you want?" And John said, "Your Highness, I want you to judge me fairly, and tell me why it is my parents worked their whole lives hard and they never got anything for it. And why I'm on that same road. I've worked for years now and I've never gotten anything for it." And the emperor said, "Well, I can't tell you that. No emperor could. Did someone put you up to this? Is this some kind of a mock with this chicken under your arm? You know what? Get out of here, and if I ever see you again, I'll cut your head off." And so John was shown the back door rudely, and the rooster behind him. And so he headed out into the wide world, leaving that place behind. And he still decided if he could find the one who could judge him fairly and tell him why it was that he had no luck in the world, he would give that person the rooster. He walked for a long time looking for that person. A long time or a short time, as they say. One day, his path took him down a road that was near a big woods, far out from where anyone was living, except there was one little hut there. And in front of that hut, there was an old man with a long white beard, and he was tending a big bonfire in his front yard. And when he saw John coming down the road, the old man called him over and showed him the hospitality due to a traveler, gave him a cup of tea. And after showing him hospitality, the old man said, "Well, young friend, what brings you to these parts?" And John said, "I'm looking for someone to judge me fairly and tell me why it is that my parents worked their whole lives and they never had anything to show for it, and why I'm on that same path." And the old man, the old hermit, the old holy man stroked his beard. And he says, "The question you ask is a difficult one to answer. It's hard to say why some people prosper and others do not. I may not be able to tell you why it is, but I can tell you what you can do about it if you'll be guided by me." And John said, "Yes, I'm listening." And the old man said, "Well, I advise you to take a wife. And if you take a wife and you join your soul with hers, at least you can go through life, the good times and the hard times together, and it may be that together your luck will change. And if you're interested, I can tell you a way to find a wife." "I'm interested," said John, handing him the rooster. The old man said, "Well, behind my little cottage, there's a path through the woods. And if you walk long enough on that path, you'll come to a willow grove, and just a little beyond that, there's a lake of milk. And near the path, on that lake of milk, there's a fine beach. And just beyond the beach, there's a little stream that feeds into the lake with a sandy bank. Now, if you wait there unseen long enough, 3 birds will land on that beach. And they'll do something unusual. They'll take off their wings. And when they do that, they'll be transformed into fairies. 3 fairy sisters. The oldest has a dress that's green like a lawn with flowers on it. And the next has a dress that shines like the glimmer of the moonlight on the water. The 3rd fairy, the youngest fairy, she has a dress that shines like the sun itself. Mark well where she puts her wings. And when the fairy sisters go into the lake of milk to bathe, then you slip out unseen, and you take her wings, and you hide them in the sand near the stream, and then hide yourself well. And do not come out for any reason until she has said the following 3 times. Until she has said, "Come out, you seen and unseen lad, and I will be your wife, and you will be my husband forever." Until she has said that 3 times, under no circumstances, reveal yourself. And that's where we will leave him for now.